One of the most devastating news for a cinephile is the announcement that your favorite director is signing on to a shelf of a project. Within the last few years, it has become common to see promising directors get involved with intellectual property that ties down their creativity and their principles as an artist. With his directorial debut in 2013, Fruitvale Station, Ryan Coogler took a risk many people of color are afraid or warned against in the entertainment industry to lead with his cultural and racial identity. A common practice for Black people in the industry is to gain an audience within their community and eventually take on more mainstream projects to help them cross over. To achieve this often means to reserve criticism of the American system, at least until they're established enough to justify, in the audience's eyes, their anger, to give so much to the people that they are deserving of a voice. Ryan Coogler's path looks different, with his debut Fruitvale Station opening at Sundance, a festival where the film was sure to be watched by an interracial audience. He could have been categorized as a certain type of filmmaker, incapable of capturing an audience uninterested in racial themes, which in America mostly means white people. However, with his follow-up films, the Rocky spin-off saga Creed and Marvel's Black Panther movies, Coogler demonstrated that he can take popular intellectual property and breathe new life into it to great social and economic success, all that without sacrificing his interest in the way racialized folks live. The question then becomes, can he do the same with an original story? Ryan Coogler's Sinners is an enthralling Southern Gothic tale of vampires, love, discrimination, spirituality, and the search for freedom. The film follows Sammy Moore, a young boy and aspiring musician, through his day working with his twin cousins, Smoke and Stack, to open the Jug Club, a place where Black people can congregate and have fun without fear of being targeted by the white people they live near but not with. Sadly, their plan is threatened when a vampire trio decides to come for Sammy thanks to his magical musical abilities. The movie has inspired discourse across social media, trying to determine the intentions and themes woven with delicate threads throughout the script. One scene often overlooked in discourse, perhaps because it feels subdued in comparison to the explosive energy of other ones, happens after Sammy plays in the Jug Club. Smoke, seemingly the harshest one of the twins, pulls Sammy aside and advises him to not pursue a hedonistic life that Smoke sees as inevitable in a place like the Jug Club. If you want to live, go down to Mount Bayou. Live with the proper black folks, he says. Despite them being cousins, Smoke sees Sammy and his family as essentially different, with his father being a pastor while the twins' dad was an abusive man. In his short speech, Smoke mentions that when they first left the city, he and his brother went to a town nearby, a town completely made up of Black people, where they own and regulate everything, the type of place, the type of people that Sammy should surround himself with. In a colonized world, maroon cities, as they are called in Latin America, were born out of a necessity for freedom and independence. It was clear to people of color that their white counterparts would never allow them to access the same spaces, so originating their own resources was the proactive route. However, their efforts were often burned to the ground over and over again for centuries. Since 1502, there is documental evidence of Black people rebelling and escaping in the Americas, with Fray Nicolás de Obando writing to the King of Spain that they should prohibit their entry into La Española, today Santo Domingo Island, as they would get together with the indigenous people of the land, teach them bad customs, and could not be captured. In maroon cities, Black and indigenous people developed their own culture, government, trade, and military defense against their European and American oppressors. By the time Sinners takes place, 1932, many cities had risen and fallen. However, due to segregation, the urge to build a functional system non depending on merciless white institutions was alive and well. Its founding was but one of the many attempts that have been made to settle the Negro problem by isolation. Even so, it was not until after the Civil War that Negroes isolated themselves voluntarily, was written in the Negro History Bulletin in a 1940s piece about Mount Bayou. The town mentioned in the film was founded in 1887 in northwest Mississippi, where many freed Black people bought land on the cheaper, less developed bottomlands of the Delta. Shortly after, the Mount Bayou Normal Institute, a Black school, was established. They eventually came to have their own oil mill, a depot, and more. The success of Mount Bayou and any other black town depended precisely on its ability to supply its residents with most things they could need, as accessing services and goods in interracial towns was dependent on the mercurial whims of those communities' white governments. In fact, many residents came from areas where the plantation traditions were very strong, and Mount Bayou offered them the possibility of a life with freedom from the annoying and unnecessary restraints imposed upon them by the continuous residence in the midst of and surrounded by those with whom they had lived on terms apparently altogether incompatible with the concession of their privilege. Mount Bayou was celebrated as an admirable example of a black community. President Theodore Roosevelt proclaimed it as an object lesson full of hope for the colored people, and therefore full of hope for the white people too. While in the year 1900, two-thirds of the resident families were black landowning farmers, with the loss of political power due to state disenfranchisement, high debt, and continuing agricultural problems, most of them lost their land and by 1920 were landless sharecroppers. The town continued experiencing economic decline during the 20s and 30s, but in the 1940s, Mount Bayou saw a resurgence, becoming a safe and prosperous haven for black people. A place for us and by us is the way Stack describes their vision for the Juke Club. Juke places existed for a long time throughout the United States, especially in the South. They were places for dancing, eating, and sometimes initiating intimate activities. Thanks to segregation and curfews, juke clubs were some of the few places black people could reunite and be entertained. Throughout the movie, we learn that the twins have a reputation for allegedly killing their own father and being overall not people you mess with. After coming back from the war and spending some time in Chicago, which, as an integrated society, seems to fascinate Sammy, the Smokestack twins are back in Delta with stolen money from the mafia. They buy an old mill from an older white man and warn him that if they see him or any clansman in the property, they will shoot. Their ownership of the land is a rarity, as many juke places operated in land owned by white people, especially because the attendees were black people working said land. For the twins, one can assume owning the land meant some type of security, a way to legitimize the place's existence. The Juke Club seems to be a success. The place is packed with people having fun and relaxing after a long day of grueling work. However, they soon see economic threats to the business sustainability due to folks' lack of American dollars, as they are used to exchanging with their currency inside the plantations. Currency which would not purchase the alcohol or other goods the twins would need to keep the club working, much less to enrich themselves. Historically, juke places were not particularly profitable. However, they were popular and sacred as reunion venues. The Smokestack twins are trying to create a profitable business. It is because of the cracks in their business created precisely by systemic isolation that the devil infiltrates their community. The vampire Remick and his two recent creations, a couple active in the KKK, approach the club trying to come in, attracted by Sammy's singing, but are rejected until Mary, Stack's white passing love interest, decides to approach them, hoping they can get some money out of the trio. Quickly, Remick and his crew turn people, creating a clan of his own, promising freedom, community, and strength to overcome the oppressive hurdles of society. Having accessed his creation's mind, Remick informs the surviving crew that the KKK plan on attacking the next morning. Even if they did not live in this vampire film, the dream of a sanctuary for them and by them would never exist. The man who sold them the property, a leader in the clan, would take their money and their lives. Earlier in the film, Delta Slim, an older musician, tells the story of his good friend, who, after they made some money together, wanted to start a church. His own innocence about the world had him show the money in front of white people, who killed him right there and then. There is no bargaining chip worth enough to buy them respect or independence as long as they live next to people who fundamentally believe they don't deserve it. And unlike what Smokes believes, there's no way to be the right kind of black people if your enemy is hateful enough. While some people might find the comparison offensive, the Juke Club and black towns like Mount Bayou are in direct reflections of each other. It is worth recognizing that despite the positive communal effect juke places had, they were often home to violence, sometimes in the hands of white people, yes, but also within the establishment. In Sinners, we see a man being shaken because he did not have enough money to settle his bill. But the confrontation could also result from jealousy or simply inebriated confusion. No Duke Place would receive congratulations from President Roosevelt, and like Smoke reveals when he said they were turned away because of their evil father's reputation, no respectable black town wanted to be seen as welcoming place for troublemakers, as they feared anything that could excuse brutality in white people's eyes. Still, they were created as a refuge for black people in a country that persecuted and oppressed them, something they all deserve, regardless of their respectability. The United States was never set up for black people to succeed. Hoarding resources extracted with their labor is an essential part of the country's fabric. There have been many narratives to justify and eventually hide the ways in which black people are isolated. The self imposed isolation was born not only out of ambition, which is a perfectly good reason, but out of preservation. The horrors of slavery, Jim Crow, and other ways of systemic oppression not only kept African Americans poor but vulnerable. The system ensured the suppression of black people, physically through confinement, shackles, and eventually limited access to quality food and medical assistance. Spiritually, through the denial of their soul, their humanity, and the position of faith that required denial of their culture, which is a huge part of the movie as well and deeply interesting. Most relevant to us today, economically, through practices that legalize exploiting them without proper compensation, if any at all. In the movie, the black people established their own trading system. The twins tried to establish their own business. Black towns tried to become independent. Yet, they were hit over and over again to keep the hierarchy that holds them down in place. That hope for independence, the blaming for not being able to achieve it, are pillars of the American narrative to keep black people running in circles. Many black towns and communities saw the rise of their hopes into a functional possibility just to start crumbling under the limitations lawfully imposed by envious, hateful authority. Redlining practices became common. The term refers to the withholding of financial services to discriminated groups, limiting their opportunities and overall confining them to less favorable areas. Laws that claimed private land as public property in exchange for monetary compensation were used to take back spaces authorities wanted from black people, with them reporting being significantly underpaid, such is the case of Seneca Village residents who lived where today stands Central Park, one of the most famous places on earth, surrounded by some of the most expensive residences. If the crumbling was not fast or disastrous enough for their satisfaction, massacres were conducted by hordes of racist neighboring towns. Oscarville, Georgia, is today a ghost town beneath the Lanier Lake, but was once a black town that became famous for being targeted constantly, with racially motivated riots and massacres occurring often until the families fled. The choice to mention Bound Bayou in Sinners is interesting. It makes sense geographically, yes, as it is the nearest black town for our characters, but also, and despite the depressing history of many black communities in American history, seems to be a call for hope. Unlike the communities recently mentioned, Mount Bayou exists today. Its website says, less than a square mile in total area, the city of Mount Bayou, Mississippi, even now stands for release, freedom, and a promised land for the descendants of formerly enslaved people. It is not perfect. As cities became more integrated, the need for black towns seemed to decline. But still, Mount Bayou's existence, even now when the town is a shell of what once was, is a piece of history, evidence of the tenacity, ambition, and love black communities had for each other. Rosewood, Oscarville, Seneca Village, and the Juke Club could not become what they were meant to be, but there is still Mount Bayou and Black Hope.